very, very minute and not enough to have reached the point of majority that we can reach. Because on your side, there is no incentive for them to actually volunteer for themselves for civilians. Because in our case, we actually have something in exchange for them. They do it for the incentive of decreasing their year. No matter just to go out and do another crime, or for the act of change, or to atone for their sins and go give back what he took from the society. This can never happen on your side, because your side chooses to believe that, okay, what do I get out of this? Okay, I can possibly create a cure, it's a possibility, and which I might take out from side effects that are permanent. And your side will not be willing to take the risk, because in exchange you get nothing except for a apostle being known better in society as a possible hero to a certain extent in the best case scenario. Okay, secondly, how does this help the whole government benefit the healthcare system? So let's understand that by having less people in jail, because having their sentences shortened, it means that less people will be in jail at one time. Because of so, there will be less and less funds needed to sustain these prisons, because there isn't as much of a need of a lot of space. Because of so, they can use this money for healthcare, which is a double-way benefit, because we can use wealth that's supposed to keep them in jail for healthcare, and them themselves as prisoners are also volunteering themselves for healthcare. So how is this different to your side? So the reason this is different to your side is because, as I mentioned before, you won't be able to mitigate possible crimes or anything like that. And our side can also, to an extent of best case scenario, mitigate crimes, because if they understand that they can go through this high risk. And let's understand, this will mainly appear to people that do major crimes. Because if a person almost steals a loaf of bread from 7-Eleven and gets like a 1 year sentence, you wouldn't do it because it's just 1 year. People that commit mass murder, that have like lifetime sentences, or like sentences up to 30 to 40 years, will only be willing to do this because they know it will only have a major impact to them being in jail. So on your side, these people will still have the incentive to do it because they know they'll just be in jail. You guys can possibly propose the fact that you guys can have rehabilitation and implement it into this society, into these jails. However, on our side, we can also implement it while having 3 options, either to stay in jail or go for rehab, and also possibly approach to this risk of cures. So at the end, our side has a better scope of benefits compared to your side. Before I move on, do you have any POIs? Okay. Now let's understand how this will work for the prisoners actually implementing back to the society. There are 2 things that can happen through making the cure. Where the cure does not pass and actually ends up killing the person that tries, or the cure ends up passes but the cure isn't developed. Therefore, when they go back out to the society, they are known to be a person that's willing to test something that can possibly help the society. How is this applied to the society? Firstly, let's approach the one where the person that attempts actually dies. When he dies, it is actually not our obligation to return to the family. Even though we know how bad it seems that a person that is relied on for the family to sustain died, and we are not giving money for them to sustain themselves, we believe we have no obligation for that. Because at the end, we exchange their sentences for this form of escape from jail. Therefore, we believe that it is fair for us not to give accommodation to a family. Secondly, when the person goes back to the society, but the cure doesn't necessarily pass, this allows them to actually be easier to step in towards the more social grounds, because they won't just be known as the person that killed someone. They will just be known as the person that killed someone, but actually try to save the population, or try to develop a cure that can possibly enhance our medical healthcare and so on and so forth. So what have I told you today? I explained you why there are certain benefits exclusive to our side compared to their side, and there are alternatives that their side can exist but also coexist on our side, therefore it's mutually exclusive. I've also told you how on our side we can also use the money that we can use less on prisons on healthcare, which also doesn't exist on their side, and I've also explained to you how their side won't have as much humble volunteers, because there's only civilians that do not get anything back for it. Because so, I would like to rest my speech.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister, for your speech. make mistakes, but it is inhumane to make someone else suffer those consequences. So before I start, I would like to start off with a few characterizations. Firstly, on what these drug experiments really mean. So these drug trials, they are usually, firstly, uncertain, and secondly, they are very unjustified. And I'll talk about it later in my arguments. Secondly, we want to tell you on how prisons are actually created and why it is the best form of retribution for individuals who have done crime. So before I start my arguments, I would like to give a few rebuttals. Firstly, they said that on their side, they allow societies to have better healthcare because now they let these criminals to be experimented with these drugs. But we say on our side that it is very inhumane to do this because why? When a person wants to volunteer to actually do these drug experiments on themselves, usually they have a choice on whether to do it or not. But usually these prisoners, they are actually forced to do this not because like the government forces them to do this drug experiments, but because they are very scared of this prison, and so that's why they would opt into drug experiments, which they think would be a better and easier way to opt out of this prison sentence. Second, they said on whether or not we say that yes, people in the real world who have the choice to volunteer would actually do this. Usually they do it because of money, and that's why they would actually do it. But then these volunteers in prison, they would do it because of a different incentive, and then we think that is really bad because it's basically forcing them to do something that they do not want to do. And thirdly, I would like to rebut on which side reduces crime rates. Well, they said that they would reduce crime rates, but on our side, we say that when you allow people to opt into other forms instead of prison, they won't have time to self-actualize. For example, the main reason why prisons exist in the first place is because we want to set a time for them to actually think about what they have done. But if you reduce the time they'll be in prison and you just let them go for these drug experiments, and in the best case they survive that experiment, then they won't actually have time to self-actualize, and so they go out in the open and then they can actually do more crime because they don't have enough time to actually think about what they have actually done. It is like, in their opinion, they just got out of it so easily. And so my first argument is why is it not justified to do this to these prisoners? Well, firstly, we say that the risks of drug experiments are uncalculated and uncertain. So we think that the point of a justice system that is fair and legal is the point in which the punishment is standardized and where outcomes are certain. And so why is it important to have a fair justice system? Well, firstly, we want to ensure that these people get the correct amount of punishment that they deserve, that they are supposed to get. And so why is this important? It is important because when we have a correct amount of punishment based on the justice system that the law has provided, then it would be justified for everyone, for the criminals, for the individuals who are involved in that crime, for the families of the victims of the crime. So basically, when there are two scenarios that will happen when these prisoners go for these drug experiments. Firstly, if the results end up being too crueler than what the prisoners ended up doing in the first place, then the government who implement this would receive backlash from the society because of what society perceives as too cruel for these prisoners. But if the drug experiment ends up in a result where the prisoner if the prisoner gets a too lenient drug experiment where they get to be released without actually having a proper punishment, then criminals will now opt more into drug tests and will think of it as an easy way out. So, second argument, why is prison a better form of retribution compared to volunteering for these drug experiments? Well, firstly, you need to know that prison the objective of a prison is to keep a person in a jail for 24 hours for a period of time proportionate to their crime based on the justice system. So first level analysis, that it is important that these criminals go through this prison sentence. And why? Because prison serves them in four ways. Firstly, it acts as a form of protection, because now when these prisoners on our side, when they go through this prison cell for their proportionate amount of time, now now society will be protected, because there will be less crime rate. And how? Because now in the time to think about what they have done, and when they go out after this period of time, they are less likely to actually do the crime again. And secondly, prison serves as a form of deterrence. So basically, we think that people will fear going to prison more, because in current status quo, a form of criminality to these people. And why is this good? Because now when these people are scared of this prison, now they are less likely to actually do these crimes in the first place. Thirdly, these prisons serve as a form of rehabilitation. So you should know that these criminals, when they are in prison, they have the time to self-actualize, and it's easier for these people to think about their actions. And fourthly, prison serves as a form of retribution. And so that's why we think that it is the best form of retribution, because these people have served the time according to their crimes as a punishment of the crime itself. Yeah. And now it will increase the likelihood of acceptance to the criminal. So go with the side that caters to all stakeholders in today's debate. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader of Opposition. Deputy Prime Minister, please.
Thai government fails to see how prison time actually helps you, atone, not only atone for your sins, but also help you actualize, right? At the end of the day, I don't see how you sitting in a cell can help you reflect and actually find out what your mistakes were, right? Because when you actually commit a crime, you do not expect to get caught, and you believe in what you're doing as justified. You believe what you're doing is right. And just by sitting in a cell, rotting daily for the next 20 years of your life or something like that, will not help you not only atone, but also will not help you actualize, right? Status quo is the best proof for that, right? People have been in and out of jail, yet they still consider themselves criminals, yet they still choose the life of crime, right? In fact, on our side, with better social integration, as pointed out by my previous speaker, there will actually be less crime under our paradigm, right? They came up here, said that, prison helps you self-actualize. When you get out of prison, it provides you with an incentive to actually change, when status quo proves not, right? Whereas on our side, when you actually provide these people with a chance to actually, take this risky experiment, and people will look up to them, not look up to them, but they will actually treat them humanely, treat them equal, because what? Because they've actually done something to help them, right? Because when you help experiment these drugs, and this drug actually becomes a thing, right? It's saving millions of lives, right? Potentially, and that's our best case, right? When it saves lives, people look at you as like a hero, and in the process of actually getting this thing, right? And therefore, they are more likely to accept you on our side compared to their side. And this is why, by this acceptance, by the social integration, these criminals are more likely to get a job, as pointed out by my previous speaker. And when you get a job, right? And when they get a job, they are more likely not to go back to crime. Why? Because they actually have a stable income, and they don't actually have to worry about monetary issues. And this might not be the case for everyone, but this will be the majoritized case at the end of the day, right? So I will add levels of analysis to what my previous speaker said, and just more analyze his points even more. So 3 stakeholders that are extremely important in today's debate: society, prisoners, and health development. pointed out by my previous speaker, when you actually allow these things to become a reality, and prisoners actually can opt into this voluntarily, as stated worded in the motion, yet disregarded by the opposition, they actually are able to help advance research and development. And as pointed out by my previous speaker, what benefits does this actually give? It raises the health standards all around the world, right? Therefore, not only probably curing diseases, but also allowing people to have a longer life expectancy. Therefore, these people actually effectively atone for their crimes. Instead of sitting, rotting in a cell, doing nothing, they actually get to help people outside. Therefore being some form of atonement, right? And people are more likely to die from a disease, if we run their case, than to actually get killed by someone who actually escapes from prison, right? It's way more likely. And if you think about it, prisoners at the end of the day can be controlled, murderers at the end of the day can be controlled, but without the proper scientific development, and without the proper research and development, diseases can be controlled. But before that, sure.
Prove to us how people would learn their lesson through these drug experiments.
Okay, these drug experiments, at the end of the day, we accept the fact that it provides no incentive, but that's to change. But isn't that just a mutual relationship, right? Secondly, we are not saying that they are not getting any prison time. Both sides, they do get prison time, right? Just one side gets less prison time than another. But why is this so? That's because they actually have atoned for their crimes through another way, right? They have atoned for their crimes through this method. It's called, they have been test subjects for risky experimental drugs. And we think that is justified, right? And I will later on analyze this in more depth, right? Third point I want to analyze, or as a layer of analysis on his point, right? Let's take this to a societal level, right? And when people, as I explained earlier, when people deem you as equal, when they deem these prisoners as equal, they are less likely to go back to crime, therefore reducing crime, as I explained earlier, right? We do accept the fact that on both sides, the research and development is extremely uncertain, and although all safety measures has been accounted for, it is extremely uncertain. But isn't this a mutual relationship? So what will happen if we do not actually allow these prisoners to take part in these risky experiments? Because at the end of the day, we still need to get human volunteers to test out these research and development, in these experiments, right? Or else we can't get to that cure that at the end of the day we actually need, right? It's a necessity at the end of the day. And I'll justify that later on in my speech as well. Well, after you finish your point, I'll take one. When you don't allow prisoners to volunteer for this, you need the civilian population to volunteer for this, right? And the monetary incentive you give them, even with the monetary incentive you give them, wouldn't that be more unjust, right? Because if you compare the weight of both people, not to discriminate, but if you compare the weight and which life matters more, one side, even though it's a choice, there is the monetary incentive. And when you are desperate for money, you become irrational, right? And therefore, it is still some form of biased choice at the end of the day, right? So is this not more unjustified? Because these people, although they are desperate for money, although you provide them with this monetary incentive, does that mean that it's justified? Why? So because just because you give them this money does not account for the fact that they still have a life outside, right? They still have friends, they still have family. Whereas these people that are criminals, right? What are most likely to happen? Because us as society, we deem them as useless, right? We deem them as scum. We deem them as outcasts. Right? And these people, they do not matter to us, and therefore they are the best candidate for this at the end of the day, right? Because nobody apart from themselves, there are no third-party harms, there are no harms outside excluding themselves, right? So what have I told you? What have I told you about today, and why is everything important today in my speech? I've explained to you how better research development outweighs the fact that although it is to a certain extent, we are providing a choice for them. I explained to you how better research development is worth the risk. I've explained to you how better development in research and scientific technology actually will benefit our world at the end of the day, and that outweighs them at the end of the day, right? And I've also explained to you why healthcare is important. I've also explained to you why better social integration at the end of the day is extremely important. And at the end of the day, I feel that our side has proven to be the better case.
Thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister. Just to wait for a bit technical difficulties, I guess. But yeah, I now invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
that the very fact that these criminals have already done crimes in the past allows for them to have like a form of standardized retribution and for them to have a standardized form of punishment. The moment in which side government proposes for you to have a punishment in a form where the outcomes are uncertain is the point in which you harm these individuals who are criminals but are also humans at the end of the day. We think that side government takes out the humanity aspect that comes within punishment regardless or not whether these people are criminals or not. Before I move on to my one argument about how you create a worse off stigma for criminals who want to reintegrate within society, a few rebuttals, right? Because firstly, they told you on how this would be a voluntary aspect of how people, how these criminals would then volunteer to become like test subjects for drug trials. We think that that this is a form of coercion from the government to these criminals, right? Because we don't think that you really give them a choice in the first place. We think that in a sense the government is then coercing and condoning these people to become test subjects, to become like the animals that you talk about in today's debate. We think that when you immediately label these people as useless, and we immediately, like I'll talk about in my stigma argument later, you immediately like disregard that these people are also humans who also have the regard to have a say in the kind of punishment that they want to. We think that it's better for us to wait for civilians to volunteer if it means that these civilians who volunteer are volunteers who consented to the harms of undergoing these drug trials. We think that when these criminals want to volunteer as a test subject for these drug trials, it is not because they really wanted to volunteer in the first place, but it's because they were coerced to do so in order for them to reduce their prison sentence. We think that they do not truly and fully understand the harms of them going through these drug trials, but you also condone that the facts that these criminals who undergo these drug trials are also animals and such. We think that the government is a side which condones inhumane treatments towards criminals, and we are not willing to support them, right? So let's move on to our argument on how like there's going to be retribution when you put these people within jail cells, when you confine them within solitary confinements and such. We think that they do not provide any incentive for these people to improve at all, that these people can just roam about freely after they either survive or not survive these cruel drug tests. We think that is a harm to begin with because they never prove to you how like retribution would be even better under their side. They also contradicted themselves by saying that hey, prison is good, but also prison is bad, and we shouldn't prison is not the most effective way to give retribution. But also in the same breath, they will also say prison is like damn good, and they will also have prison in their case. We think that we are confused, and we should we would like to clarify in their third speaker, right? Now let's talk about the issue on acceptance. They told you on how people are more likely to accept these people the moment in which these people survive these drug tests and are seen as good Samaritans and are seen as heroes of society. We think that when these people run about free, when these people go out after these drug trials, we think it's more harmful for them because these people are going to say that you were the easy opt-out option and you survived from that drug test and you survived from that drug trial. Therefore, you haven't served the amount of time that you were supposed to, even if you did serve your crime. But in our worst case scenario, in their worst case scenario, what if these criminals run about freely after they do survive these drug tests? We think that you even provide a worse off stigma for these people, that these people have never learned anything from their drug trials, right? We think that you provide a worse off sentiment for the governments because we think that the intensity of your punishment through drug trials are not the same as intensity that you go through when you are in prison. We think that then your forms of retributions will fail. But lastly, right, let's talk about how they told you that it's not their obligation as a state to care whether or not these people die or they don't die out of these drug trials. We think that regardless of whether or not it's criminals, we think that the state has the obligation to care for these criminals or whatnot. We think that we only allow people to undergo drug trials because we think that it's a very delicate and very risky process. Therefore, you have to have volunteers who consented to all these harms. These are criminals who are being coerced into, and these are like people who we are not willing to allow to have these people to go through these drug tests. But let's move on to my next argument, reintegrate with society. They told you, like they specifically, explicitly told you on how their second speaker said, all these prisoners are useless, they are not worthy of our time, and we should not care for them. This is the exact same stigma you create for people who want to reintegrate within society, because you tell the society that, hey, these people are animals, these people were treated like animals, to the point in which they consented to become test subjects for these for drug trials. What does this necessarily mean? You create a stigma for people who want to reintegrate society that they are useless, that they cannot get jobs. Even if you are a good person, you are a good person because you are useless, and that you have no worth and no time and no place within our society. But we also think that the stigma that you create in the point at which you have a prison time for these people is that these people, the victims and the families of these victims, get closure from whatever they say, from whatever punishment they get within prison. We think that yes, you do get time to self-actualize within the time that you are rotting in jail, as compared to you having time to self-actualize the moment you run free after you survive that drug test, or maybe not end up 7 feet in the ground. But we also think that these people get a better chance for them to reintegrate with society, because these people get closure. These families and these victims are more likely and highly likely for them to actually accept these people within their community, because they think that these people have gone through the time that they were supposed to, as compared to you getting the either really harmful and really risky drug test, or the really minimal drug test. Because we think that the outcomes of whatever drug trial that they were having, although they do have these technology advancements and research development, we think that their outcomes of their drug trials are uncertain. Go with the side that cares for humans, regardless of whether they are criminals or not.
My debate will be kept simple. We're just going to explain which side in the end has better achieved a better outcome, and then which side will better win, and which side better plays a role in society. But firstly, I have a lot to get through regarding the rebuttals, and I'll then move on to my stakeholders and why in the end we actually benefit in every single way, and I'll draw comparisons with worst case and best case scenarios. Now, firstly, there have been a few things pointed out by them where we find our complete assumptions, and I shall point them down and prove what is more likely to happen and what is actually happening right now. Now, firstly, on their first speaker, they've mentioned that people who aren't prisoners will volunteer with the money aspect. We find that this is no different with prisoners when you give them, hey, a shorter life sentence. But they say that they're more justified than ours with no actual lines of reasoning. But we find that we are more justified because they atone for their sins, and that's given material by my earlier speakers. And they have also mentioned that governments will actually receive backlash. We find that this is not covered up by lines of reasoning. However, we actually find that society benefits from this. And also, society doesn't care about these people. Because you already said about stigmatization. Why would society do this? And even in the end of the day, society knows that they're benefiting from this with research and development. Their healthcare system actually improves. They get better cures. And on the point of rehabilitation, this point was already encountered and rebutted, but they still insist in this. However, how do you explain people who still do crimes after they have rehabilitated in prison? Well, matter of fact is, they may or may not rehabilitate. However, this is also still happens on both sides. Now, they have also mentioned about the humanity aspect. We find that we actually have the more humanity aspect. This kind of risky experimental tests, this happened in status quo sometimes, but just that not risky. But we find that it is more human, because these people who have done something wrong in society will atone their sins by actually giving back to society something good, something that might actually save someone under cancer, might save someone who's under a disease and losing out on their job just because they cannot work because of their disease. At the point on coercion, we find that this is true, every bite that bullet, but however, coercion is still under choice. You can say no, you can say yes. However, as long as this exists, And they have also said of stigmatization, which actually happens on both sides. And we don't see this as a proper point. But however, they say that they claim that people will see people as easy opt-out people. We find that this is completely false, because people most likely think that you're the type of people that's actually ensuring that people who are suffering a disease can actually will either suffer less or won't suffer at all. But even then, people will still think you're a murderer. But at least we have the better perspective on our side. And they mentioned state obligation and tried to rebuttal that. However, it is only under state obligation if there's societal harm. If these people say yes, that hey, I want to do this, bring better cause, this isn't under state obligation. And not just that, we find that people who are put into prison actually loses their human rights anyway. So I think this is in the end the most humane thing they can actually do. And now moving on to actual stakeholders, 3 to 4, which is health development and the scientists, people working under the health development, prisoners, and society. Society works under societal level, whereas the health development works as sort of like an enclosed community. However, going on to prisoners first. Prisoners, we agree to a certain extent of the definition of prison. However, we only agree on isolation, or in other words, what they have said as protection. Now, prisoners isolated for a reason. They have done something bad, and they're put there for a reason. However, these prisoners at least are seen better by society. Like on your side, they're just seen as people who are useless, done something wrong. Once they get out, how are they going to get a job? Now, onto the point of health development and scientists. The thing is, with health development, we really proved that we get better quality drugs, but they did not even engage with this point at all, and they prefer prisoners to rot in jail. And scientists actually get more certainty in the experiment. They have mentioned about uncertainty, but have actually never clarified what this actually means. Yes, people might die. We have already said yes to this, but at least these prisoners who have already done something wrong actually give them back to society. These scientists are also, and what scientists are limited to is actually that it is inhumane to work on humans. However, with prisoners able to, have a seat first, with prisoners able to atone their sins, they're able to also, scientists are able to make new scientific studies that could provide better quality healthcare and just improve society overall. And now, this coming back to society, this does not bring societal harm, but in fact, quite the opposite. This brings societal benefit. But before I move on, would there be any POIs?
How are you sure that the effects of the drug trials are going to be proportionate to the crime that they do?
Yes, I shall bring that to the comparison. But however, in the end, a cure is still a cure, and it might save a life. But in the end, I'll just bring it into a comparison. But on the point of societal benefit, the thing is, as we already mentioned, people do not have to spend as much money, or in other words, the government taxes, they can use the money in other fields, such as health development or education. You do not have to spend as much in prison because there's not as many prisoners anymore. This is completely unengaged by their side. If that's not the case, then at least people do not put as much taxes, do not have as much taxes. Now, society will also be more accepted to criminals, but however, they're not like the most accepted thing on earth, but they will be seen better than how they see criminals. And in the end, our society is more healthy, we have less diseases. And now, to actually come back to their POI or whether or not the crime rates are proportionate to the cures they are making. Now, I think this is talking about casualty and whether or not to consider both sides or not, whether cure people who are about to die or people who are about to die are safe from them. We still have the justice system. Let's remind ourselves that these people still go to jail. These people are still spending time in there. However, it comes back down to these few things. One of them, which is, which side has more casualty and which side benefits more in this case. At least, on our side, maybe we have more murderers, assuming that people who get out of jail will become a murderer right away. This is the worst case scenario. However, at least with this situation, we have less diseases as well. People are less likely to die. But however, what's the difference between a murderer and a disease? As pointed out by my second speaker, murderers can be controlled, but illnesses cannot. When you have an illness, you're suffering, you can't work on your job, you can't earn money for your family, or you're about to die, these things are uncontrollable. And only with medicines, which we need to work on. But with murderers, there's always thought process. There's always the justice system, whether or not they really get rehabilitated inside these, then they do. We actually have the cures, and in the end, prisoners with consistency in their mind will actually think that they can do for a better cause. And the roles of prison we find is also better because people can actually atone for their sins, whereas they provide what is just protection, and all the other roles are rehabilitation. We have already proved doesn't even count. We find that with prisoners able to atone for their sins, we find that is far more fair on their sides, and we find that this is far more humane and a better system as for a prisoner. And prisoners can actually give back from society rather than rot in prison. Therefore, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Government Whip. To end the substantive case of the debate as a whole, opposition would please.
This debate is about which side benefits the criminal justice system. We tell you that just because you're forced into making a decision doesn't mean that you actually want to do it because you want to benefit the society. You only did it due to your desperation in order to get out of prison because you don't want to go through that prison sentencing. It doesn't mean that you actually self-actualize and you actually want to be a functioning member of the society. We believe that criminals opting out from prison sentence by doing drug tests is unjustified. In my speech, I'll be proving to you two clashes. Firstly, which side creates more acceptance for criminals, and secondly, which side creates a better criminal justice system. But before that, I would like to just state that the difference between people who do drug experiments due to monetary incentives and people who do drug tests because they want to reduce prison sentencing. Understand that people who do it for monetary incentives already conceded to the harms because these people aren't forced into making their decision. They are free to make the decision whether they actually want to opt into this drug test or not. The difference is people who want to do it to reduce prison sentences, they actually make an arbitrary decision because they were too clouded by their desperation in order to not face prison sentencing. That's why they made an uninformed choice. Meaning to say that they didn't go through the stigma and make them face the risks of towards their life. Moving on to my clash, firstly on which side creates more acceptance for criminals. Under our side, we already told you on how prison is the best form of retribution because the prison sentencing is proportional to the incentivity, it's proportional to the harm that of the crime committed. Meaning to say that the amount of prison sentencing is proportional to the effects of your actions towards the victim. And this is important because under our side, victims are more likely to get better closure because under our side, the criminals know that at least under our side, the victims know that these criminals have already faced the same amount of punishment compared to your side, where going through drug tests is not proportional to the crimes they committed because the drug tests are uncertain. Some people might experience more harms while others might not experience much harms, and this is harmful because criminals who have committed more crime are more likely to opt out of prison sentencing and just get the easy way out if the drug test that they go through doesn't impose much harms to them compared to criminals who didn't actually commit that big of a crime, but then the drug test that they mass murder. And we think that under our side, once these victims get closure, now people are more likely to be the victims have already accepted closure. No. And benefit the society. But first of all, we tell you that this is uncertain because some tests do benefit the society, while others might not get the results that is wanted. And secondly, we tell you that as people who benefit the society, but at the end of the day, these criminals are not, because they didn't do these drug tests because they want to be beneficial to the society, but only did these drug tests in order to opt out of those prison sentencing. Therefore,
benefit the society.
Order.
When people feel remorse of the action they do, it means that they regret whatever they have done. And once they regret whatever they have done, they know that whatever they have done is wrong, and they are less likely to commit it again. Moving on to my second clash, on which side creates a better criminal justice system. Firstly, understand that the criminal justice system has four purposes, right? Firstly is to provide protection. On this point, our side already told you on how when you put criminals in prison, it ensures that these criminals don't opt into it. It ensures that these criminals cannot harm the lives of the society. Whereas it's not, it's mutually exclusive on the outside. Secondly, it's to create deterrence. We tell you that this is more apparent on the outside because people fear prison sentencing more than these experimental drug tests, right? Because we tell you that prison sentencing are standardized and they are absolute, compared to your side where drug tests are unstandardized and the outcomes or the harms of these drug tests are uncertain. Therefore, we tell you that people are more likely to fear prison sentencing. Thirdly, the criminal justice system serves as a form of retribution, and we tell you that this is better under our side because the harms that the criminals face are proportional to the harm that the victims face. And lastly is because it's the best form of rehabilitation. Because we tell you that under our side, once there's solitary confinement in prison cells, that is when people are more likely to self-actualize, and that is when they are more likely to rehabilitate from their actions. And lastly, on stigma, we tell you that at least under our side, humans are not put at the same pedestal as animals. Because this is worse, because at least under our side, it shows that the government actually has the obligation to protect the rights of criminals because they are humans too.
Thank you so much, Opposition Whip. To begin the reply speeches, Opposition reply speaker, please.
You know the way Body Shop packaging has like the words animal cruelty free? That is the same way our prisons should also have the same words of human cruelty free. We think that on side government, you condone human cruelty to the point and the extent that you don't care that criminals die out in the most cruel way anyway, because you do not know the outcomes and the uncertainties of your drug researches. But let's move on to like 6 issues that boil down in today's debate. Firstly, whether or not it's fair, whether or not it's humane for these individuals to undergo these uncertain drug tests, right? We think that they told you on how the only thing that they said about humanity within today's debate is how there exists no societal harm. We think that the biggest societal harm and the biggest societal risk that exists within today's debate is that these criminals, die. We think that in the worst case scenario, that when these people die, we think that you then do not care of the safe being and the well-being, that these people are also humans too. But let's move on to the second issue, right, where they talked about how retribution does not matter and how their way of retribution is good. They told you on how the drug trials will make them a way to atone for their sins. Look, we tell you for that period of time when they go through the harsh reality of them going through that drug trial, sure, they would atone for their sins in that period of time. But the moment in which they leave that drug trial either dead they don't leave their drug trial at all, or they live in a way that they are like free, right? We think that then you don't provide any incentive for these people to even want to improve themselves, because we already told you consistently in all three speeches that there exists protection, there exists deterrence and rehabilitation and retribution within the state prison systems, right? We think that that is the best way for you to treat people and for you to make them become more functioning members of society, as compared to you either A, surviving or not surviving these drug tests, right? But we think that that is a flawed way for you to provide retribution towards these people. But third, let's talk about whether or not it was a choice to begin with. In all three speeches, we talked about how these people never had the choice to begin with because they were coerced, right? Because we tell you that they made these choices under pressure, that they wanted to leave prison as fast as possible, meaning to say that they made these choices under a clouded judgment. They made these choices without actually fully consenting or fully understanding the harms that they have to go through if they actually go through these drug trials, as compared to civilians who like maybe slowly volunteer to become volunteers for these drug tests. They had the time and the pleasure of time to actually think about these the harms of them actually going through these drug trials. But fourthly, right, they told you on how which side provides acceptance. Look, it's great that your side wants to provide like a narrative that these people are great heroes and that these people are like good Samaritans. We think that that is only like a temporary facade that these people have, right? But forever and ever that these people will be labeled as animals who wanted to go through these drug trials in order for them to be let go. We tell you that the narrative that happens even further and even worse on your side, because the stigma that sticks with you is permanent, as compared to you going to prison when you are allowed to like reintegrate with society without you being called an animal who wanted to go away scared free. We think that the forms of like acceptance that happens under our side is still better. But the fifth, right, they told you on how under our side we won't find a cure at the end of the day. Look, we rather find a cure in which people consent to all the harms and it's fair way for them to find a cure, as compared to your side you have like a very cruel way for you to find cures. We rather trade off the fact that you find like cures very urgently, as compared to urgently if it means that you find the cure in a most legal way. Go with the side that actually cares about criminals, even if they are animals.
Thank you so much, Opposition Reply Speaker. To end the debate for Novice Grand Finals, Government Reply Speaker.
It's been a very long day. Let's just rush this through so that we can just all get our rest, guys. Today, I'm just going to explain why our side have certain points that weren't necessarily touched on, even though Op believes that they have touched on. And there are certain points that Op believes are exclusive to them, but actually mutually exclusive. And because of I'll conclude to why I was actually made at the end of the day. Firstly, they keep in all four speeches, the LO, DLO, the whip, and the reply, all four said the fact that this test is uncertain, but also explicitly say the fact that people that are civilians that volunteer, people that are doing for monetary values, all are actually understand the harms. So does that mean if we pay money to these prisoners, all the uncertainties turn into certainties, which is what your side chooses to believe? Secondly, you believe that they are left under pressure with making these decisions because they just want to escape prison. Okay, but doesn't this pressure also exist on your side? And instead of having a way to escape, you guys will have just to break out of prison and even have a higher chance of dying? And another point to say is the fact that there is, at the end, they say we have no incentive to change. Both me and my second speaker have explained to you that when you move and rejoin to society, they keep talking about the fact that you'll be known as the person that just escaped for the sake of getting past this and understanding that you just got out of it because you explicitly went through this trial. Let's understand, in the first, I guess, 4 lines of my speech, I explicitly stated that significant is only judged by about around 50%. We are not saying you should just spam using this test again and again and again and again just for the sake until your sentence reaches 0. Please, if you have like a 10-year sentence, you do it once, you do it 5 years. Extreme, you do it to 2.5. And I explained to you already why we believe that the death is at the end the choice of the person, which they also decided to counter propose by saying the fact they as pressure in making these decisions. Let's understand, guys, we don't live in a world where we see prisoners and we be like, this is something you can do. We don't tell them at all what can happen. We be like, you can play basketball, but we don't tell them that you can grow tall, you can like possibly injure yourself. We don't say that. That's what your paradigm believes. Our paradigm is this: prisoners, you can take this test. There are these harms. We explicitly state there are these harms. You still want to do it, it's your choice, not anyone of ours anymore. You survive, good. And then when you understand this, the social structure can actually accept you better. Because firstly, they won't deem you as just the person that murdered someone. They will deem you the person that murdered someone and possibly also help conduct change to the society, which in return also allows job opportunities to be gained easier. On the other side, job opportunities are almost impossible because if you have a crime record, your opportunities of getting jobs is lower and lower and lower and lower. And eventually, you have to resort to more crime because you're like, hey guys, I have no job. I need to find money. Why don't I steal a loaf of bread from 7-Eleven? So, but in my reply speech, I explained to you why a lot of points on their side are mutually exclusive. And on a lot of points on our side were not specifically touched on, and even if touched on, were not completely understood on the context. And because of so, I would like to rest my case, and so I can go back home and sleep.
Okay, thank you so much to both. Thank you so much to the reply. That ends the debate for Novice Grand Finals. Please, across the room, shake hands.
The moment I can't see that reply.